You ever look at the US president and think, wow, they seem like they can do almost anything? But is that really true? In this explainer, we're going to dig into the constitutional guardrails designed to limit that power and what happens when those limits get pushed to the absolute breaking point. Calls for constitutional action, like this pretty intense one from Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, don't just pop up out of thin air. They're a reaction to specific words and actions that really test the boundaries of presidential authority and make people ask serious questions about fitness for office.
So let's get into it. What kind of presidential actions have actually sparked these huge debates about the limits of executive power? Let's take a look.
Yeah, this really is the central question, isn't it? We're not just talking about disagreements over policy here. We're talking about actions that critics say challenge the entire structure of the government itself.
For instance, when a president publicly floats the idea of using American cities as training grounds for our military, that's going to set off some major alarm bells. For many, this isn't just tough talk. It feels like a threat to use the armed forces against your own citizens, completely blurring the line between military and domestic authority.
Then you've got the pardon power. Alexander Hamilton, way back in the day, argued it should be a tool for humanity and good policy. But what happens when that power is used to give sweeping pardons to political allies, including folks involved in challenging an election? The whole debate shifts. Is the power being used for the public good, like Hamilton wanted, or to protect a political movement from legal trouble?
And this shows another major flashpoint, a direct clash with the judiciary. You have a federal judge giving a direct spoken order to stop deportation flights, and the Department of Justice argues it's not enforceable because it wasn't written down. The judge's response? A heck of a reach. A confrontation like that really strikes at the very heart of checks and balances.
Okay, so all these events raise a massive question. What actually stops a president from overstepping their authority? Well, this brings us to the constitutional guardrails that were designed for these exact kinds of situations.
You have to remember, the framers of the Constitution were deeply, deeply suspicious of concentrated power. They didn't want a king, an absolute monarch who could do whatever they wanted. Instead, they built a system that's more like a constitutional monarchy, where the leader's power is limited by a set of rules, a constitution, that not even the president can ignore. And the first, most important guardrail is this idea of separation of powers. The concept is actually pretty straightforward. You divide up the government's work to make sure no single person or group can ever get total control. It works like this. Congress, the legislative branch, they write the laws. The president, as the head of the executive branch, carries out those laws. And the courts, the judicial branch, they interpret the laws and settle disputes. Each one has its own job, and they're all designed to keep an eye on each other. But what if the problem isn't a power grab, but the president's basic ability to even do the job? For that, there's a more specific tool, the 25th Amendment. It was ratified back in 1967, and it lays out a clear process for what happens when a president is unable to discharge their duties. As you can see here, there are two key ways this can go down. On the left, Section 3 is simple. A president knows they're going in for surgery, so they voluntarily transfer power for a little while. No drama. But on the right, you have Section 4. That is the dramatic, controversial path. It allows the vice president and the cabinet to involuntarily remove a president they believe is unable to govern.
So you have these big assertions of power on one side and these constitutional limits on the other. Now, let's look at what happens when the system is really put to the test.
You know, the 25th Amendment wasn't just some academic exercise. It was born from real-life constitutional crises. In 1919, Woodrow Wilson had a massive stroke, and his condition was kept secret from pretty much everyone. Then, FDR's failing health was mostly hidden during his last term. The amendment was specifically created to make sure those kinds of dangerous situations never happened again.
Now, trying to use Section 4 against a president's will is, well, it's designed to be incredibly difficult. Just look at this process. If the president fights back, the whole thing goes to Congress. And the threshold to keep the VP in charge is huge. A 2/3 majority in both the House and the Senate. That's a higher bar than even impeachment.
And this quote from Hugo Balta really captures the modern debate. Should the 25th Amendment only be used for a clear medical issue, like a coma? Or can it apply to a president whose behavior is seen as just too erratic and dangerous for the country, even without a specific medical diagnosis?
So this brings us to the biggest and maybe most fundamental unresolved question. When a president pushes against the guardrails, who actually has the power to enforce the rules?
I mean, really think about it. What if a president just ignores a court order or a congressional subpoena? What happens if they refuse to accept the results of the 25th Amendment process? This is the ultimate constitutional crisis scenario. Who makes them comply?
Well, one perspective is just a fundamental belief in the system itself. This view says that the rule of law is strong, the structures are there, and an institution like the U.S. Marshal Service would ultimately enforce the orders of the courts.
But then there's a deep, deep skepticism. This view argues that our system depends almost entirely on tradition and the good faith of the people in power. If a president who controls the entire executive branch decides to ignore the other branches, what can they practically do? As this person so bluntly puts it, maybe nothing happens, because the president controls the very people who would be sent to enforce the rules against them.
And that's the fundamental question at the heart of all of this. The Constitution provides a framework of checks and balances, but it's not a user manual with an answer for what happens when a key player just refuses to play by the rules. It's a question that tests the very foundation of the American democratic experiment, and one that for now remains unanswered.